Hello and welcome to our Voices in Montessori podcast, brought to you by the Greenspring Center for Lifelong Learning. Please subscribe to our podcast so that we can continue to support your important work. As Dr. Montessori said, an education capable of saving humanity is no small undertaking. We agree, so let's get to work. I'm Tamara Sheasley-Ballas, and in today's episode, we're talking about tools we can use for designing learning environments with human development at the center. My guest today is Seth Webb, the Director of School Services with the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector. Prior to joining NCMPS, Seth worked in public Montessori schools in Arizona, Colorado, and New Zealand as an assistant, upper elementary teacher, instructional leader and coach, dean of students, and principal. He is Montessori credentialed in both elementary and adolescence, is a state licensed teacher and principal with a master's in education from the Center for Contemporary Montessori Programs at St. Catherine University. Seth is also the parent of 2 Montessori children, both now in college, each of them having the gift of attending Montessori programs from Children's House through high school. Welcome, Seth. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, and I'm so excited to talk about how we design our learning environments with human development at the center. So let's dig right in. Let's talk about first, what really is the goal of education? You want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Montessori talks often about this in her writings. She talks about how the purpose of education should be to elevate the individual. She talks about how we have to love humanity instead of wanting to apply a preconceived plan. And so I think we have to really, at times, go back to her writings to get a sense of how to orient our work in this space. But I think we also have to, in addition to that, remember that we are social scientists. And so being standard bearers of Montessori's work as social scientists, we have to be thinking into what matters most in the lives of kids and adolescents. And for us at the National Center, and I think for us globally as Montessorians, we take a real holistic perspective towards this. We want to ensure that when students become adults, they're able to thrive. And by that, we mean thriving socially, emotionally, intellectually, and economically. We want to ensure that they have the skills to participate meaningfully in family and community and civic life. And when it comes down to it, we want to just ensure that they can live a life of curiosity, agency, and satisfaction. And all of those developmental objectives are really borne out by what the research is telling us is most important. Oftentimes called the dimensions of wellness, a sense of well-being, physical and mental health, a sense of social belonging, finding meaning and purpose in one's life. So if we orient our practices in the classroom, if we create our school environments in such a way that these outcomes are being fostered, then I think that we're doing our work. We're doing our work not only as it relates to Dr. Montessori's vision and mandate for us, but also in terms of what scientists are telling us are most important.
That was just so beautifully said. I just want to really acknowledge that that is exactly what we want for children, and yet culturally it is not what I think our families and our young people are hearing about values. I think there's a lot of focus on success, achievement, going to Harvard, wealth, and not that economics are not, like, we want, of course, as you said, but it's such a different way of thinking about our outcomes and where are we putting our attention.
Yeah. It really means that we have to be very conscientious in redefining the outcomes that we are advocating for in our schools, which then influences the programs and the design of what we are doing day to day. And it also means that I think both as teachers and administrators and parents, we have to be staunch advocates for what children and adolescents need, which is not often the same as the conventional narrative, which you just mentioned, right? So the more that we can be speaking to what science is telling us is most important, and the more that we can be bringing folks in to witness the power of high quality Montessori environments, perhaps in time, that narrative can change.
Mhm. And when you say science, can you help us know where what your resources are? Because I think for people, oftentimes what I find is I have to support families and staff in knowing that this is research backed. It is we can get swept along with the current of how the culture is seeing the world rather than actually knowing that what we're doing is the right thing.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, one of the really exciting things about the last, oh, 10, 15 years of education research, both in and out of the Montessori space, is that there has been so much research that a number of authors have been able to annotate that in ways that are really digestible for the layperson.
Mm.
And so when you seek out those resources, what you hear delineated in those texts are these things being most important, as borne out by the research. Having the ability to maintain focus and have self-control, to be able to take perspectives, communicate your ideas to a variety of stakeholders, to make connections between seemingly disparate aspects of our content, to think critically, to rise in the face of challenge. All of those themes are bubbling up more and more now as what is most important. Um, and really that maps beautifully onto our position at the National Center, and I think also our collective position as Montessorians in this space is that we are coming to this work with really an empirical mindset and child-centered orientation, where because we are social scientists, we need to recognize the scientific origins of our work. After all, Dr. Montessori was a physician, but also an ethnographer and an anthropologist. And so because of that history, we too have to show up in a posture of wishing to study our clientele, our students, and to learn more. And so through that process, we can build our collective knowledge of what we know about how humans grow, and then knowing that, we can create the conditions in which human flourishing can occur. And we're talking about the flourishing of both the little people in our buildings, but also the professionals in our buildings too. And to do that, we have to really lean into what it means to design and implement Montessori programs of high fidelity, which perhaps we can talk about in a little bit. The other two pieces as it relates to this kind of research or empirical or orientation to our practice is that we also have to be sure that we are reaching across demographic barriers, ensuring that our work is inclusive and applied at the child level and equitable. And that I think lastly, to your point, we have to embrace the spiraling nature of refinement that's inherent to our work, which is, we believe as Montessorians that we have a really powerful pedagogy and a curriculum that is incredibly rich. And yet we should recognize that we don't have all the answers. And so as we are refining our practice day to day in service of students in our classrooms, we also have to be able to be open enough to learn what researchers outside of Montessori, as well as inside of Montessori, are telling us about what's most important. And then knowing that we have to be not afraid to act upon those insights that science is providing us. And so I think it is both an act of advocacy to stand up for what we and research believe is most important. But it's also an act of clarity and humility too. Let's not be so attached to our pedagogy that we're afraid or reluctant to lean out a little bit and embrace new information that's coming to us.
Mhm. I so appreciate that, and we're seeing that in our Greenspring Montessori School community, where we are really cycling back through reading, for example, and really discovering that there are pieces that the reading for reading in that are not addressed in the Montessori curriculum at the Children's House level.
Hmm.
And some children, do explode the way Dr. Montessori spoke, but the book on literacy that's come out recently, and we'll list that in the show notes today for our listeners, that we're finding a lot of value in making sure that all those holes are filled. So I'm really appreciate you saying that, because Dr. Montessori would want us to continue to be social scientists. She'd want us to pay deep attention. She was not somebody who said, "Okay, well, this is it. We're all set."
Mm. Yeah, it's a real exciting time. I mean, once we cross that threshold to be open to new learnings, then things really change for us as educators, both frontline practitioners in classrooms and school leaders too. We have a grander view of what's possible, because sometimes our pedagogy and sometimes what we've learned in our training and what we remember our trainers saying can be limiting at times. And so let's lean back and really learn from what we know about the ecology of human experience. And what's really exciting about taking that posture is that we can recognize and incorporate into our daily practice really four foundational developmental precepts that I think undergird not only our work as Montessorians, but undergird the work of any educator for whom developmental learning is at the center of their work. And the first is, and this will not be new to our listeners, but the first is that human development is an integrated process, right? We learn and grow in a myriad of braided ways, socially, spiritually, physically, intellectually. And so knowing that, we have to be listening for and watching for how all of those different developmental needs are manifesting in the students that we are caring for, and then tailoring our support of those needs each day. So that's one of the precepts that I think is really exciting for us to kind of root our new practice in. The other
Mhm.
piece, or the second precept that is really, I think, important but also comfortable for Montessorians, is that human development is gradual and continuous and cumulative. And for us as Montessorians, it will feel very familiar, recognizing that we often use our planes of development to plan for the students that are before us, right? So we recognize that the actions of today will inform what happens tomorrow, right? And we also recognize that it is fairly uncommon that human development is linear, right? And so while some students present as moving A to B in a very straight line, other students will present in ways that are full of fits and starts and plateaus and going backwards. And really, if we're honest with ourselves, that's very much how our own lives have been, depending on how many years we've been on the planet, right? So those are the first two precepts that are really important for us to consider as it relates to regrounding our work in what we know about how humans learn and grow. The other, or the third, is that human development is an active process. And so we have to remember that the principal player in this stage play is the child, is the adolescent. And sometimes, because adults are complicated, um, and we have a lot of stuff that we bring to our work, sometimes in some schools, the needs of the adults get in the way of the needs of the children. And so, how do we have honest conversations about that dichotomy in our schools such that both can be served well? We serve the practitioners well. In so doing, we serve the students well. And then the last precept that I think is really important for us to ground our work in is that the quality of the learning environment matters. The learning environment and how it's prepared is going to either impede healthy development or foster healthy development. And so how do we really lean into the prepared adult and the prepared environment as real hallmarks for grounding our work as Montessorians?
Mhm. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you actually go in and design those environments that provide for human thriving. And and if you don't mind, speak some to where there are overlaps in those needs between the adults and the children. What we find is if we can bring a Montessori lens to our adult relationships, so often those same protocols that we have for the children in the classroom actually are what we need for adults as well.
Mhm.
Um, because so many of those needs are similar and we often forget that. But okay, so how do we design then learning environments that have human development at the center?
I think one of the really exciting things about our work as Montessorians is that there are particular pillars of our practice that that are beautifully aligned to what we know about how humans learn and grow, what we know about those foundational developmental precepts. And so when we think about how we prepare ourselves as Montessorians, one aspect of our preparation can be to remember, dust off, or to refamiliarize ourselves with the human tendencies. And we remember that these are those psychological dispositions that we are forever orienting ourselves to fulfilling over the arc of our lives, um, be it a 3-year-old or a 53-year-old. It will look different over the arc of our lives, and yet we are always tacking and course correcting to ensure that we are fulfilling those things like orientation and communication and abstraction, say. So having that list of tendencies front and center as part of our observation practice, as part of what we have next to us when we are observing students working with materials after a after a lesson presentation, could really help us remember how to serve our students in progressively more specific and tailored ways. The other, or the second, pillar of our practice is another resource, another tool designed by Dr. Montessori, which is the planes of development. And so again, these are those biological characteristics or somewhat predictable hallmarks that we can plan for and around as it relates to the particular ages of students in our classrooms. We remember that the first 3 years of each of the planes is a time of skill acquisition. The second 3 years is a period of skill refinement and crystallization. So there's this nod towards remembering what the developmental characteristics are of each of this age groups in our classrooms. But the other piece, as it relates to developmental characteristics, is also remembering that this is not only about academic skill development, right? This is also about social development and greater levels of independence. So in our earliest classrooms, our youngest classrooms, it's all about physical and biological independence, right? In our elementary classrooms, this is the age of asking questions. This is the age of reason. So we really want to be fostering mental independence. In adolescence, we're talking about social independence, defining oneself in relationship to one's friend group and family and community and society. And then as we go into the fourth and dare we say fifth plane, we're talking about how all of that leads up to creating the adults that we are envisioning, transforming society. So human tendencies, a great place to orient our practice. Planes of development, a very natural place to help inform our lesson design. Um, the second piece, or the third piece rather, that we can keep in mind as it relates to the energy of our classroom environments is ensuring that we are providing for spontaneous activity. So students having the opportunity to choose freely, not from a drop-down menu from the adults in the classroom, but really have the autonomy to choose what work they're going to do and with whom and for how long and why and when. That's real independence. And what we notice when we are able to foster that level of spontaneity is that we see a deeper and deeper level of engagement, which is, after all, the whole, ball game, right? And then going back to your original question, which is how do we do this, tactily or functionally, is to prepare ourselves and our spaces with these outcomes in mind. And for us, that means an environment that is both safe and courageous. It allows for risk taking, both risks being taken by the students as well as the adults. Spaces that are optimized for learning. So really ensuring that we have the right materials available at the right time for students to engage in purposeful work. And adults that are coming to the practice objectively, seeing every new day as a new opportunity, and also seeing every child as a unique individual. So coming to the work with a real inclusive mindset. So those four pillars of our practice really can be summed up in the Montessori triad, or what we call the developmental core, that relationship between the child and the adult, and the child and the adult and the environment. And we at the National Center believe that this relationship is so critical that we actually developed a tool that helps us measure and understand the level to which our preparation of the self and our preparation of the spaces maps onto these wide scope developmental outcomes that we know are so important in the lives of students. And that is called the DERS, or the Developmental Environment Rating Scale. And it's an iPad-based classroom assessment tool that really allows the observer to change their gaze between focusing on the behavior of the adult and the preparation of the physical environment, as well as observing what the students are doing. And what it provides as a result is data that measures how well we are orienting our practice and our space relative to these outcomes that are most important. One of the things that can be challenging when we're observing in classrooms is knowing how to observe and who to observe and when. And what the DERS tool does is it prompts the observer to be thinking critically about certain aspects of the classroom and its people at any given time. Currently, the DERS is designed for early childhood environments as well as elementary environments. We have an adolescent DERS that we're beta testing right now. But what's exciting about the tool as well is not only is it orienting towards what we believe is most important for students as Montessorians, but it's also framed in the theory and practice of developmental learning. It's grounded in research on cognition and pedagogy, and it helps us to align these characteristic inputs and outcomes of developmental education, which is the whole purpose of our being, right? So the DERS would be a great anchor tool to help inform a Montessorian's practice, both in their own classroom and then as a level leader or as administrator, using it as a coaching tool to support teachers doing their best work.
Well, and I have to share with you, our leadership team has all been trained in DERS, and it's something that we often refer back to also in supporting new staff in understanding expectations and what is a fully implemented Montessori classroom really look like. You just went through a number of pieces that I think a lot of us who are trained have heard in training, yet it can feel like so much to try to hold all those pieces simultaneously. And it allows for one to really look and say, okay, I'm going to work on these three pieces, and here's what it looks like when it's fully implemented. Because we have to remember that it's a really big lift that we're asking Montessorians to create every day in the classrooms, and holding all of this and holding these children with grace and love, and any tools that we can give them, which is part of why I have you on the podcast, is because the tools that you all have developed are so useful in really what it's a mammoth task that we're
Mm.
each and every one of us is taking on and committed to. We're making the world a better place, and it's not so easy, and we need tools. So I
Yeah,
really I
yeah.
want you to know we really appreciate the DERS in our community and are grateful. And one of the things that you all should just know is there's also a book, and we may talk about this later, but that you all have published called the Montessori Assessment Playbook that we use as a resource quite a bit. And they have in there a number of resources and references to back the science of everything that Seth is sharing right now. So this is all science based and so useful. So okay, so Seth, let me ask you then, let's talk about school wide, right? You have those pieces for a classroom and which you spoke really beautifully to. Let's talk about school wide and what does a learning environment with human development of not just the children, but our adults really look like?
Can I go back just a tick?
Of
And just
course.
I just wanted to lift up one thing that you mentioned just about your own experience using the DERS, and I'm so glad that it's been a successful protocol for your team. Sometimes as Montessorians, and perhaps especially as young Montessorians, fresh out of training in their first, few years of being in their own classroom, we carry such weight from our training environments often, right? And we carry such weight. We each can perhaps hear our trainers' voices in those initial years, right? Because to your point, we do feel such heavy responsibility to do this well, right? And oftentimes, what that shows up as not only teacher training itself, but also early years practice that privileges technical proficiency of like delivering material-based lessons over taking kind of a wider view of to what we talked about at the top of this conversation, which is the goal of education. And I think sometimes, and I can count myself as guilty of this too, as a young educator, I became so narrowly focused on ensuring that I was um, designing and delivering the lesson presentations with such fidelity that at times I forgot to lean back and remember that while those are critically important, those are pathways to developing the skills that are going to foster these outcomes that are most important. We also have to remember to do things like ensuring that we are looking for joy and delight in our students, that we are able to witness them reasoning through challenging situations, either feeling frustrated with themselves or with peers. We want to be looking for curiosity and creativity. We want our classrooms to be busy centers of communication and conversation. We want to be fostering, opportunities to practice self-regulation. And so all those look fors are are ancillary and follow-on effects of high-quality material presentations. But to your point, it's really more about taking a wider embrace of not only the whole classroom, but the whole school. How is it that we can be thinking differently about creating a powerful and positive envelope for all learners in the building, both the young people and the adults, such that we can really be thriving, so that all of us can flourish? So to your question, which is what might be some tools, resources, or strategies to help inform a school-wide approach to human flourishing, designing with human development at the center. One of the anchor tools that we initially released in 2015 and has been revised over the years. And what's really wonderful about the essential elements for public Montessori is that they're available for free. You can go to our website, public-montessori.org. You can download not only the essential elements for public Montessori, but also the Essential Elements Implementation Rubric, and another tool that we just released this spring called the Foundational Commitments for Public Montessori. So if you are in a school or part of a school that's just starting up, that tool might be a really helpful advocacy mechanism as it relates to what you want to be privileging in your planning and startup years. The essential elements and more tools are all part of a resource that we released in 2019 called the Montessori Assessment Playbook. You can
Mhm.
also find that on our website. It's an incredibly powerful compendium of tools, ranging from observational strategies to appraisal protocols to skills inventories for teachers to use in classrooms as they're planning. So we really encourage you to reach out and use that tool as well.
I tell you what, as a new school leader, I would have been so, so grateful to have those tools. So really appreciate that. And um, I will also share for those of you who are not new school leaders, oftentimes we feel like we have to reinvent the wheel. So these are foundational elements that are worth taking a look at, I think, for all of us. So when you talk about core principles of practice, these are is this something that you all have already defined, or is this because what I would expect is that schools need to do the work themselves of really digging in and understanding what their priorities are.
So it's a little bit of both. So let me talk just a bit about the history of the essential elements by way of translation. So the essential elements actually initially came out of a conversation between the large venerable Montessori organizations back in the mid 1990s, AMS, AMI USA, NAMTA, MEPI, SMTC. All of those organizations agreed to come together to codify some core principles of practice for schools in the public sector. And they did that because in the mid 1990s, this was part of the rise of charters and choice programming. So there was a lot of enthusiasm for growing Montessori in public spaces. The challenge is that, as I think you and our listeners will recognize, even though it's gotten better, these large vulnerable or these large venerable organizations often have a tendency to decamp in doing things only in their own way. And what was problematic at that time in the mid 1990s is there was a real fear that when, for example, districts or charter authorizers reached out to one of these organizations to get information and clarity on how to do this Montessori thing in the public sector, they would get widely different interpretations of what mattered most. And they would throw up their hands, and that would undermine the large scale effectiveness of getting Montessori to more people, right? And so the essential elements first came out of that conversation, and they existed and were individually branded with attribution to that conversation and shared widely amongst those large organizations. And then in 2015, the Montessori Public Policy Initiative, they did another drill down on the essentials, and they released a document called the Montessori Essentials with a real focus on advocacy, with the audience being policymakers and district leaders. And for their essentials, which they still have on their website, it's really a focus on curriculum and training and professional development and enrollment and assessment. So fairly high level, but critical things for authorizers and policymakers to have in mind as it relates to Montessori. In the same year, 2015, we released at the National Center a tool then called the Essential Elements for Montessori in the public sector with a focus on implementation, how it shows up and how it's translated in terms of day-to-day lived experiences by children and adolescents. So as I mentioned earlier, the focus of our document was really around both fidelity and sustainability, wanting to create a tool that both authorizers, school leaders, and leadership teams could use in self-reflection, which gets to your question, which is we have designed this tool and progressively refined it over the last 9 years to better map onto what feedback we received from the field, what we witnessed in our work in schools across the country in terms of what was most important. And what we recommend schools do is they use the essentials as a starting place for self-reflection. What we know about this work is that engaging in reflective practice is critical, not only to our work as individual teachers and teaching teams, but also as whole school communities too. And one of the exciting things that we often have the gift of doing at the National Center is going into schools and working with leadership teams or whole staff communities centered around a review of the essential elements for public Montessori. And what it does is it kind of like quiets the noise because we're focusing on what's most important for students and organizational success. It engenders real, honest, thoughtful, and vulnerable conversations, which we have to have if we're going to be successful institutions. And then to your point, it allows schools to prioritize um, where they want to go next. First off, what are the assets that we have currently that we can leverage and lift up and perhaps use in additional ways? And also knowing where we want to go, what steps do we need to take that will get us there? That could be tomorrow, that could be the next 6 months, that could be the next 12 or 18 months, but it's a galvanizing tool that allows folks to act sensibly with here and now in mind, as well as the long-term end state in mind too. So it's one of those protocols for reflective practice that is really a cornerstone to our work.
Okay, so that there's a lot for us to hold as Montessori schools. You have some great tools to support that work. So can we talk about ways that schools can foster ongoing opportunities for reflective practice?
Yeah, I really appreciated what you talked about earlier in our conversation about how it's helpful to remember that how we are designing our spaces and how we are showing up for the students that we are caring for, we can mirror in very similar ways as it relates to how we are interacting with each other as adults in our schools and how we are creating and curating an adult community of curious learners as well. Um, Second only to high quality Montessori teacher education, teacher preparation, is ongoing pedagogical support, right? I mean, I think that we all can recognize that perhaps in our first few years of being in our initial classrooms after training, we were probably surprised that there was not a collection of normalized children before us. Suddenly, this became very real, right? And while teacher training talks a lot about doing the thing, meaning preparing material-based lessons and key experiences and delivering them, often it spends less time talking about how we observe, how we think critically about the diverse needs of the students in our classrooms, how we need to be um, progressively thinking differently about our work day to day. And for some of us, we can do that on our own, but there will become a point where our ability to learn and adapt reaches a bit of a plateau. And so what we are very excited about at the National Center is ensuring that in our schools, we have members of administration or perhaps the curriculum and development team and individual teachers who are engaging in coaching of their peers. I think it's really important that we pause for a moment to kind of redefine what we mean by coach here. I think if we've worked in public education or education writ large for very long, often the idea of a coach sends kind of shivers up one's spine, right? Because often a coach is brought in when there's a problem that needs to be fixing, right? Sometimes that you're assigned a coach because things aren't going well for by a variety of metrics, and so you meet with a coach, and really it's about fixing something that you're not doing well yet. Our posture about coaching is decidedly different. Really, what we are advocating for is the coach is a peer's personal trainer. It is there, somebody to walk side by side you, to support you engaging with this work. Um, just like, to your point about how we are preparing ourselves to support the students in our classrooms as guides on the side, walking along with them as they create greater understanding about their world and universe. We also want to be fostering the same kind of relationship with folks that are doing the coaching work in our schools. And so that could be somebody that's designated as a full-time coach or a part-time coach who's regularly spending time observing in classrooms and meeting with individual teachers and talking about practice. Um, Not simply identifying things that are going wrong, but really engaging in critical conversations around a teacher's perspectives, what they're wondering about, and providing thought partnership around next steps. So it could be an individual person whose role and responsibility is that work. It could be a teacher leader who is supporting a peer or a group of peers in their level. It's all about ensuring that we are spending time talking about our practice. One of the things that we see often, if not almost all the time in the schools that we work with around the country, is that teachers don't have enough time. They don't have enough time to plan. They don't have enough time to think. And they don't have enough time to talk about important things. And while who's organizing that field trip and who's organizing this special event are important because they are part of what we do at our schools, what we really want to be ensuring that we're spending our time on the clock doing is talking about practice and children. And one great way to root that work is through coaching conversations. And one of the great aspects of having a coaching conversation is that the way that coaches show up is not trying to identify problems, but really exploring possibilities, not telling teachers what they're doing wrong or what they need to be doing more or less of, but really spending more of that time asking questions, really engendering from within them their understanding of the present state of affairs in our classrooms and where they could go next in service of their students, recognizing that this is progressively a dynamic job. So we believe at the National Center that coaching is that catalyst that serves to root reflective practice in schools. So broad brushstrokes, we're perhaps using the essential elements for public Montessori and the implementation rubric to think critically about how to create a healthy container for everyone to flourish. When we think about high quality practices in the classroom. We could use the feedback from the DERS tool because that's related to these outcomes that mattered most. We could call them flourishing. And then when we talk about one-on-one conversations or conversations in teaching teams, it's having those coaching conversations about practice that really roots high quality service to students across our classrooms. It really demands that we are looking at what systems and structures do we have in place and are they serving students well? It demands that we are looking at ourselves and how we're showing up day to day, prepared to serve the diverse learners in our classrooms. I'm always making sure that we are mapping on our work and our orientation exactly onto the needs of the children and their families that we are serving. So coaching is a great way to root that work.
Agreed, agreed. We've gone to a model where we have peer coaching throughout our community now, and including our assistants, and it's not just the guides. So we rotate who gets to go, and we find it to be really important for building the ethos of the community as a whole, for supporting our assistants in understanding and deepening their own practice. And then, of course, our guides have the opportunity as well. And it's been incredibly valuable. And actually, not, it's a lift for sure in the community, but not as hard as one might think. So
Mm.
we've got to wrap up. I just want to say thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Clearly, you all have much to offer and so many resources and have thought about these things so deeply. So thank you for spending some time sharing some of your expertise with us.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, and I really enjoyed having the conversation.
Oh, good. Me too. To our listeners, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Please take a look at our website, greenspringcenter.org, to view the show notes from today's episode. More information on the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector is included on the show notes page of our website. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast and hear the latest episodes and join in the conversation on Facebook and Instagram. The work you do is so important. I say it's the most important, and we're here to help. Join us next time.